Hi there, I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council, and we are back in the City Council chambers for the first time in 2 months. At least I am. Most everybody else has gone home by now. First, before anything else, before we get to tonight's recap, 1 year ago today, on June 8th, 2019, you entrusted me to represent you on City Council. I haven't been sworn in for a year, but I was elected a year ago by you. I hope I'm living up to the expectations you had in me, and I'm going to continue to strive to live up to them every day. Now tonight, we started out with our preliminary open meeting with appointments to the 2021 Citizens Bond Referendum Review Board and filling an interim position on Planning and Zoning Commission. We also had an agreement to come back with a vote to change our water contract with the North Texas Municipal Water District. Now, anybody who's been following this and our water prices in Plano know that this is a huge deal. There are several constituent cities in the North Texas Municipal Water District, 13 of them, and any change to the constituents contracting has to be unanimous. A lot, and I mean a ton, of negotiation and discussion has gone on behind the scenes for many, many moons to come to where we are today. We are within striking distance of a full agreement to change our water rates. Now, actually, I can't discuss the details yet, but just understand that what we have discussed is good for Plano and has entailed a lot of hard work. Next, we heard an engineering department report with Caleb Thornhill, engineering director, regarding, they cover staff, 70 staff, including facilities. We heard from a report on the Compliance Division, which covers the Americans with Disabilities Act and Title VI, anti-discrimination. The Development Division, which includes engineers and inspectors. And in a couple of stats, in 2019-20, which we're in the middle of right now, we had 1,040 right-of-way permits and 60 small cell applications and 80 new development or trade permits. And then the Community Investment Program Division of the Engineering Department, which manages design and construction of new infrastructure. Our funds stood at street fund, $78 million in the Community Investment Program, water, $26 million, wastewater, $12 million, and drainage, $56 million, for a grand total of a whopping $172 million. We moved to, I should say that the fund has had a projected 200% increase in project values in the past 5 years. Part of this is because we've collected more in tax revenues over the past several years until we adopted the effective tax rate, now called the no new revenue rate, last year. And we're using that money, of course. And our infrastructure is, on average, getting to be about 30 years old, which is end of life. And so there's a lot of work to be redone to rebuild our infrastructure, repave our roads, repair, replace. And that is why we've got up to an estimated $350 million coming up on bond proposals next year for the voters to approve. It's because we have a ton of work to do. Naturally, with the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic disaster that has precipitated, we're gonna have to be very judicious in what we spend money on and the bonds that we approve. And finally, we had an overview of the CARES small business package. $171 million in CARES funding was given to Collin County in general, at large, for all CARES. $5 million of that we have determined to make use for small business relief in the city of Plano. This money is being allocated for for-profit businesses. This allocation is not for nonprofits. It's for companies with 100 or fewer employees with a physical establishment, not total work from home environments, and for companies that have been in the community for 2 or more years. You have to be able to demonstrate a loss of 25% or more gross revenue from the pandemic itself. The grants will range from $5,000 to $25,000. There's a whole list of criteria to determine how much. It's applicable to business rent, lease, and mortgage and utilities, except for water and sewer. That's what you can use the money for. The applications will open up from June 15th to June 22nd. Here's the catch. It's going to be for randomly selected applicants. It's going to be on a lottery basis. The damage wrought to our economy from the pandemic is a whole lot more than we could fulfill through this CARES funds that we got from the federal government. So we know that people are hurting more and have a hole bigger than we can fill. So the decision was made to apportion awards by lottery. Unfortunately, that means some small businesses are going to get nothing. Some are going to get between $5,000 and $25,000. As City Manager Israelson stated during the meeting, we wanted to make sure it was a meaningful amount, and I likened it to being the $10 recipient of your share of a class action lawsuit. That's not going to help anybody in any meaningful way. So unfortunately, there will be winners and losers, but we're trying to do it in the most the most non-subjective way possible, the most impartial way possible. The details of this can be seen on our economic development site, planotexas.org. That's Plano, Texas. Texas is spelled out, T-E-X-A-S, planotexas.org. Then we moved on to our regular meeting. Today we had a proclamation of Juneteenth, June 19th, to commemorate the abolition of slavery. This has taken on renewed meaning in the past couple of weeks. And it's important to note that we've come a phenomenal way in the history of the United States. We've come a phenomenal way as a civilization and as a culture. We've done it in two big landmark scenarios. One was the abolition of slavery, and then 100 years later, the Civil Rights Act, which ended segregation. We have come a phenomenal distance. I want everybody to understand that racism and even the institution of slavery, which is as old as the human race itself and featured in most every major civilization until just 150 to 200 years ago on planet Earth. Racism is a condition of the human heart and the human spirit because we are fallen and we are sinful. Humans tend to self-segregate. We do. We seek out others that are like us. Each and every one of us can self-segregate if we choose, and we may. But we each have to make the decision as to whether we are going to treat others as inferiors or give others a chance and treat others as equal based on anything but their deeds. No matter how much progress we make, we can always strive toward a more perfect condition for as long as humans run the show on this earth. We then moved on through the consent agenda. That was all passed. The first item for individual consideration was a grant to grant a specific use permit for outdoor commercial amusement to an area zoned light industrial 1. That was for a rock climbing facility. That was granted. The next one was to make a change to our reasonable accommodation process. This is when somebody needs a reasonable accommodation in zoning. Currently, we have them go before two different boards: the Building Standards Board for some things and the Board of Adjustment for other things. We're now streamlining this. We're going to create an accommodation review board made up of Board of Adjustment members. And the Building Standards Commission will no longer hear reasonable requirements requests because they'll now be handled through that accommodation review board, and there will be no fees for requests. The third item engendered the most discussion. It was the proposed sale of a piece of city-owned land adjacent to the Dart Light Rail at Park and Avenue K. This was proposed to be sold to the Plano Housing Authority for $900,000, payable in annual installments of $45,000 over 20 years. The current appraised market value of the land was $1.85 million, and that was after a $400,000 deduction for the need for demolition and debris removal. Now, this likewise, to put it in an analogy, was likened to if you want to buy a house, but it needs a new roof, you're not going to pay the full market value of the house. You're going to have a deduction for the cost of the new roof that needs to go on. Now, the whole center of the debate around this was that it's a taxpayer subsidized housing development under the Plano Housing Authority. 80% of the 250 some odd units, I think 254, would be taxpayer subsidized. The remaining 20% of units would be at market value. Now, in terms of the use for this parcel of land, I agree that and multifamily housing has a value in specific places. This was intended to be multifamily, and I think that if anything was going to go in that specific parcel of land, or if multifamily was to be appropriate, it would be appropriate right there, because it is right next to the DART rail, and especially taxpayer subsidized housing, which meets a special need of the workforce. However, the Plano Housing Authority was anticipating that it would make about $130,000 per year in excess of the costs to run that. Now, PHA, Plano Housing Authority, is a not-for-profit entity. So that excess amount of money wouldn't be profit. Of course, they'd have to reinvest it in the business and in the community. What was being proposed, that $45,000 repayment to the city for the parcel of land that we would sell, was 1/3 of what they anticipated getting on an annual basis, until $900,000 had been reached over 20 years. Now, several of us felt that if the equation were that it could happen if we contributed the land at less than market value, or it couldn't happen at all, then that would be one conversation. But that's not the conversation we were having. We were having the conversation of providing the land, donated in effect, at substantially less than market value when the funds appeared to be there to repay it over 20 years, and then some. Not that we'd ask for more than what it would actually cost the taxpayers. But in the end, because of that, there was a motion to deny the request as presented, which passed. The motion to deny passed, which means that this did not move forward tonight. Based on the discussion that was had, it looks like we would need to go back to the Plano Housing Authority and renegotiate those terms and say, okay, it looks like council might have been supportive if the entire market value of the land would be paid back, and a priority were placed on that. It is worth noting that the city would bear the risk. Now, just because Plano Housing Authority is anticipating making 130 some odd thousand a year in excess of costs, that doesn't mean that that would actually be realized. If nobody chooses to live there, then of course they're not going to make anything. So in the event that that would happen, the city just wouldn't get paid back. So we bore the risk. So there's potential upside to be had by simply repaying the taxpayers for the value of the land to put the taxpayer subsidized housing on. And so it looks like they'll go back and they'll investigate that. So expect that to come back before council at another time. Then we moved on to the final item for individual consideration, which is a continuation of the additional authority. I hesitate to call it emergency powers, additional authority granted to City Manager Israelson during the COVID-19 pandemic. The reason I hesitate to call it emergency powers is because truly all it does is grant him a little additional flexibility in terms of procurement matters, and anything over the amount that is budgeted for the year, which council passed, he still has to seek council approval. He can just expedite contracting within the already budgeted amounts. He can make quicker procurement decisions, and he can make changes to city operations in terms of staffing or facility closures, things like that. without waiting 2 weeks for a council meeting or convening an emergency meeting. He can consider whether meetings of boards and commissions can move forward and how, such as moving them to Zoom meetings. And lastly, he can waive codes and regulations that would be too burdensome to meet under the conditions brought about by the pandemic. He cannot create new codes and regulations, only waive them. So if it's going to create an undue hardship on citizens to do something in the current environment, in either the health or the economic conditions brought about by the pandemic, he can waive those requirements on a temporary basis. We extended this additional authority through July 29th, which is our second meeting in July. However, that's only 2 days after our first meeting in July. In July, council meetings are reshuffled in order to recognize that summer vacation is there. And the ability to convene an emergency meeting for routine items that would otherwise come onto the consent agenda is difficult in the best of times. We do it on occasion when there's a real emergency item to consider, but for these kind of routine expenditure items that go into the consent agenda, there's not really a need to convene emergency meetings for them. But if it's impossible to achieve a quorum in July because various council members have made plans because it's summer vacation, and those of us who have kids, their kids are free, etc., then it might just be impossible to convene an emergency meeting. That said, the additional authority granted to the city manager is not such that if there's an actual emergency, that council wouldn't just have to convene no matter what. The city manager still does not have authority to take such matters into his own hands. So anyway, that was extended to July 29th because this is still a changing situation. It's not as fluid as it was a month ago, but it is still sending surprises our way. So the next council meeting will be on June 22nd. That is my oldest daughter's birthday. She will be turning 14. And so I hope that is a very short meeting so I can get back to her, because we are now back in council chambers. Until next time, I'm Shelby Williams for Plano City Council, and I want to urge everybody to participate in the healing that we need. During our opening prayer tonight, I said that 2020 seems like a highlights reel of the greatest tribulations that have been visited on American soil in the past century. We need to seek healing, unity, and a shared sense of purpose. So I urge everybody to do that. I urge everybody to look to the future and create the brightest future we can for the United States, for Texas, and for Plano. Thank you, and God bless.